Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will cover ways to increase operational efficiencies, reduce security and compliance risks, and improve enterprise operations by leveraging a single toolchain. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I'm the Working Group Program Manager here at ATARC. I would like to welcome all of our attendees and a special thanks to Helen Ortel, Kira Aubrey, and the rest of the GitLab team. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our visionary keynote and our panelists, which will be followed by a Q&A where we will pop in a few polls and then answer your questions. Before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to please submit questions of their own in the Q&A section of this platform. We'll be going through them during this panel discussion, so please send them in as we go. Also, remember to answer the poll questions to ensure that you receive your CPE credits for attending today's session. Now, I would like to introduce our visionary keynote, author of the recently published The Essential Guide to Managing a Government Project, What Every Project Manager Should Know, Michael OBrien. Mike, over to you.
Most of you are probably aware that the federal as well as state and local government information technology projects are too often plagued by cost overruns, schedule delays, and technical deficiencies. It's been my experience that a major contributing factor is that both government and industry project managers continue to make the same mistakes as previous PMs. And while formal Program Management Institute or PMI training is invaluable, once PMs get thrown into their first project or as they advance in their careers, most of this knowledge falls by the wayside. Plus, some of the fundamentals don't directly translate to government arena. What seems to be missing is an institutional sharing of actual hands-on experience, the what to do and what not to do based on previous project successes and failures. So today I'd like to discuss 5 problems I've observed as well as how to effectively deal with them. These are just a few of the lessons from my latest book, The Essential Guide to Managing a Government Project, which was published by the Government Freelance Exchange or govflex.com. My favorite quote about the importance of project clarity is by Lily Tomlin, who said, "I've always wanted to be somebody, but I see now I should have been more specific." This applies to so many aspects of project management. All IT, both hardware and software projects, should but don't always start with a solid set of well-written technical and operational requirements that clearly define what the end users want. A valuable lesson for me was if it can't be verified by testing or inspection, then it isn't specific enough. As an example, I once reviewed a specification requirement from a he who shall not be named agency that does air traffic control that stated, "The maintenance computer console shall be user-friendly." I was unable to get them to be more specific. During acceptance testing a year later, the system end user had their largest maintenance technician try to sit at the console, but his legs didn't fit under the keyboard. So they rejected the system as being user unfriendly. I also want to emphasize how important it is to get every agreement in writing. As a young PM, I took over the management of an Army development project. At the last minute, the government replaced the quality assurance inspector. This new person decided the requirement for documentation of all subsystems had to be military standard, and forced us to spend about $400,000 in documentation changes. Regarding the importance of acceptance criteria, I thought it was revealing that in the 2021 GitLab Global DevSecOps Survey, for the 3rd year in a row, respondents pointed to testing as the primary reason for schedule delays. On the other hand, of the nearly 4,300 survey respondents, 60% are releasing code 2 times faster than ever before. Hopefully, automation will take up some of the testing slack. But I'd also recommend spending sufficient time with your project experts to make sure you understand how the government will test whether your deliverable, for instance, a desktop application, meets their requirements, and that the acceptance criteria are documented. If it's not clear, have a technical interchange meeting to nail this down. It doesn't make sense to rush to deliver a solution if your client won't or can't use it. By the way, you might be surprised how many PMs I've coached haven't actually read their entire contract, including the attachments and special clauses. Talk about a recipe for disaster. And my questions about the cost risk associated with different contract types, especially fixed price, and their understanding of standard pricing terminology is usually met with silence. This is easily remedied by taking the time to read every shall and will statement in the contract and statement of work, as well as any special clauses and addendums. Remember that shall means you have to do it, and will means the government or the customer is responsible. The proposal team will usually have prepared a requirements traceability matrix that can help with this task. Project acceptance testing is too late to discover unfulfilled contract requirements. Speaking of proposal teams, contractor PMs need to go out of their way to not only read all of the proposal, but also talk to the primary proposal capture and business development staff. Scheduler time management is the process of recording and controlling time spent by the staff on the project. However, a common problem I've observed over and over again are projects that have delivery deadlines that even with superhuman efforts can't be met. The options in this situation are renegotiate the deadline or project delay, employ additional resources or increase the cost, or reduce the scope of the project, deliver less. It can be helpful to take a senior management to discuss the necessary workaround with the client. By the way, some PMs may feel that if the schedule is monitored and the planned dates are met, costs will take care of itself. And for labor-intensive contracts, a strong correlation does exist between schedule and cost. However, to avoid cost overruns, both schedule and cost data should always be closely monitored, and forecasts of schedule and cost performance compared and used as sanity checks against each other. There are detailed lists of schedule and cost metrics in my book. Of course, there are times, depending on the nature and politics of the project, that you might need to adjust the optimal schedule to meet an established or contractual project end date. This might involve accepting a reasonable management challenge of getting more done for less. Also, if you find yourself behind schedule, you may need to impose seemingly drastic measures to control schedule performance. 4 of these are shown here. Such things as external work weeks, extended work weeks, added staff, weekly or even daily schedule reviews, and planning with daily inchstones can be effective in improving schedule performance. Of course, any schedule impacts should be immediately communicated to management and, if appropriate, to the client. No one likes to be surprised. Having participated in hundreds of reviews of government projects of all sizes and complexity, both for contractors and agencies, I must sadly report that only a handful evidenced a satisfactory degree of risk management, reporting, and control. Most PMs and their management barely gave risk lip service, and too few statements of work and requests for proposal required it. This might also be one of the reasons the GitLab survey respondents emphasized operation failures due to rushed or ignored planning. So PMs need to take risks to heart and try to mitigate major risks on their projects before they occur, so they have fewer major issues to deal with during their project's life cycle. Risk can include the possibility of suffering a negative impact to the project, whether it's decreased quality, increased costs, schedule slip, or project failure. Several years ago, I successfully implemented an automated version of this risk process for the GSA FedSim project managers. It had these 5 elements. Employ a logical risk management planning methodology. Identify alternatives to achieve cost, schedule, and performance goals, as well as assist with decisions on budget and financial priorities. Analyze potential risks. Identify appropriate responses to risks and monitor the health of the project and provide risk information for progress reviews. For each potential risk, assign either a numerical value or green, yellow, red for the likelihood of the risk happening and the impact on project success if the risk occurs. Prioritize these risks and plan on expending the necessary resources to mitigate the most likely and most impactful ones. These are the only ones that should be reported in monthly reviews. This will hopefully keep your senior management from getting into the weeds. Use a risk register similar to this one to track each risk, including a mitigation strategy, responsible party, and status. There are almost 100 project risk and issues described in my book. The last two of the 5 challenges I'd like to discuss today are more soft skills. The first, an inability to make sound decisions, is often a source of major project risk. Too many PMs and executives make significant decisions without a thorough analysis and discussion with all interested parties. I've witnessed $100 million bid pursuit as well as design decisions being made in the hallway. Avoid doing this. In addition, while delaying a decision can be demotivating, costly, and unproductive, keep in mind that at other times it can allow you to gather more information and consider new alternatives. Successful IT projects utilize a decision-making approach that follows these steps. Identify the problem or opportunity and key success factors. In other words, what would a successful outcome look like? Get the facts. But at some point, you'll need to stop gathering information and begin accessing it. A brainstorming technique is a useful tool to employ to develop a list of the best alternatives. Spend some time analyzing each alternative, then rate each alternative against the set of success factors and assign a risk level using either a numerical or color value. Select the alternative that most closely matches the desired outcomes and has a medium to low risk. And don't forget to communicate the decision to all stakeholders and then regularly measure the implementation progress and be open to change of direction if new information comes to light. I've found that making decisions in this way takes a lot of the distracting and potentially misleading subjective emotions out of the decision process. Here's an example of a weighted decision-making matrix for vendor selection. As you can see, the selection criteria are on the first column, and then each vendor is rated against these different selection criteria, either numerically as shown here or with color coding. Just a simple matrix like this can make a huge difference. Too many PMs, and for that matter, managers at all levels don't delegate or listen to bad news. One such executive literally drove me out of a company after 10 years because of the disastrous impact of his inability to listen. Having done over 100 organizational assessments, I've found that there is always someone at the middle level of the organization, and on occasion, even the receptionist, who is aware of at least one of the major problems that wasn't being addressed by management. This is also true on a project. But first, a very quick digression. Many small business government contractors are founded by engineers and scientists who, while experts in their field, have limited experience managing an organization. These growing pains are enormous, especially if the founder is unwilling to gradually relinquish the need to be involved in every single decision. This can also occur in the government when a dual technology track doesn't exist to allow for non-management technical advancement. Unfortunately, the same is often true of PMs. PMs who don't delegate become a single point of failure and aren't able to raise future leaders of the organization. Today's younger staff members usually want to have some ownership in the project they're working on. Absent that, high performers will abandon ship, resulting in mediocre project performance. Like organizational executives, PMs need to be willing to hear bad news without shooting the messenger. This behavior adjustment can take some work, but it pays huge dividends because it usually the problem everyone but the PM knows about that results in project failure. Actively seek client feedback regarding what is going well and not. And really listen. Listen to your teammates too regarding project status and concerns. You can't fix it if you don't know about it. I'd like to thank you for this opportunity to share just a few of the over 100 lessons from my new book.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. And we will now go ahead and have our panelists come on screen and begin our panel portion of this event. And I would like to start by having each of our panelists please introduce themselves, who you are, what you do, what your role is, and anything else you'd like to share with our audience up top. Let's start with Dusty first, please.
Hi, my name's Captain Dusty Baker. I'm a active duty Marine intelligence officer working in acquisitions right now. Recently just finished up a 6-month residency with DoD Platform One, which is an Air Force software factory that's been all the buzz lately in the DevSecOps agile world. And I recently transitioned back to my role at Marine Corps Systems Command as the DevSecOps implementation lead, trying to bring some of those lessons learned back to the Marine Corps.
Thank you. Over to Clarence.
Oh, okay. Hi, I'm Clarence Baker, and I am the, I guess, the director for HR modernization at HHS and the Office of Human Resources in the Human Resource Systems. What that includes is implementation of ServiceNow throughout HHS, specifically with the HR centers. We have 9 HR centers. And it also includes shutting down peripheral systems or legacy systems as well as we move forward. That's about it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Anthony, you're up next.
Yes, forgive me. I was actually answering a message from my boss. So I'm a senior project manager at CSOSA, which is the Courts Service Offender Supervision Agency for the federal government. So I guess I'm a glorified babysitter most of the time.
Thanks, Anthony. And then Brian.
Yeah, good morning. Almost afternoon here from Denver, Colorado. I'm Brian Fox. I'm with 18F. That's the digital consultancy here within the federal government. So we're housed within GSA, but support partners across all of the federal government. I, however, lead the national security and intelligence portfolio. So, hey, Dusty, glad to meet you. I've worked with the Platform One and Kessel Run folks in the past, but anyway, we help government understand how to move forward on modernization, bringing modern methods, and also culture so that the technology stack can improve over time. So anyway, glad to be a part of today's event. Thank you.
Thanks. And we just got an intro from Mike, but Mike, would you like to come on and introduce yourself again? Mike Lissigor. You're on mute.
Okay. Hi. Okay. Yeah. Well, it's really a pleasure to be part of this. I actually live on an island off of Seattle. So we're, as you probably have read, we're all been sweating buckets. I for many years was a government project manager and business development. So I've worked on government contracts since the 70s. And I've written several books and written hundreds of articles, and mostly about project management, business development, and risk management. And I've worked with all the agencies on the screen, and it's really been a pleasure. I have so much respect for what government technologists are doing to try to improve government services.
Thank you. And then Link.
Hi, so Link Williams. I'm a senior solutions architect for GitLab. I support the DoD, specifically the US Navy, Marine Corps, and Defense Health Agencies. I'm a former Navy corpsman, and for the last 15 years, I've been running Tiger teams for the DoD, the public sector, and federal law enforcement agencies. So I get to a little bit of the best of both worlds, delving deep into the technology, but also being responsible for the project and program management side of it.
Excellent. Great lineup today. So in honor of this webinar title, which is how not to manage a government development project, let's just for fun go around and share what you should not do. Just one thing. We don't want to spend too much time on it because then we're going to talk about the positives. But Dusty, what should you not do when managing a government project?
I would say the first thing you should not do is not listen to your technical experts and your users. I think probably the biggest thing from my point of view.
All right, Clarence, how about you?
I think at least the thing that pops out for me is one of the things you should not do is educate your customer, especially if you're bringing in new technology. You should do that. Okay. Because the new technology will go ahead, it's going to change a lot of stuff, right? So that's the first thing that pops up for me.
I like it. Anthony, what should you not do?
Should not assume that all stakeholders, especially executive stakeholders, want this project to succeed.
All right, thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I would say plan everything up front. So waterfall planning is something to avoid, and being overly focused on business requirements. 18F, brings human-centered design, as Dusty described. Listen to the user. So human-centered design and agility, iterative development method. So whatever's contrary to that is what to avoid.
And then Mike.
I would encourage everyone not to avoid passing up information to senior management when there's a problem. It doesn't get any better, even if it's painful.
Thank you. And Link?
Excellent. I would say the number one rule for me is don't do things the way you've done them in the past. There's always a better way of doing it. And every time you do something, your next time should be better. So if you're just continuing to repeat the same thing over and over, then you're falling into that redundancy trap.
Great insights. So now let's talk about what you should be doing to lead a successful project team in the government. I'm guessing a lot of the answers are going to be the opposite of what you just said, but we can dive into it a little bit more. So Dusty, let's start with you. I'll just continue to go in order. What are some of the big things that you want to leave our audience with in terms of what they should focus on when leading a successful project? And if you have any specific examples, I think that would be really interesting to share.
Yeah, so Brian kind of hit on it. Not following waterfall and leaning heavily on agile management methodologies. So you're not trying to define all your requirements up front because they're going to change. They change rapidly. I've experienced that heavily with a big contrast between your typical DoD acquisition programs at Systems Command, where we try to define program requirements all up front in one big document, versus my time over at Platform One, where everything was agile. Everything, what you started on a month ago was you didn't even recognize it a month later, and we had very happy users, and things seem to work just far better that way.
Yeah, I know Clarence in the prep call meeting, you talked about the waterfall approach. So I know you have some things to say about that as well. What else would you like to leave our audience with in terms of leading a successful project team up top?
I think the thing that jumps out for me is, and the last speaker just brought it up, is we immediately implementing new technology. We went with the agile approach, agile project management, agile development. Agile only works if the customer understands, has some type of basic knowledge of agile and what the expectations are. So as we implemented applications, one of the lessons learned was, hey, we need to give these people a 5-minute brief on what agile is, what it means to you. You need to be available for sprints, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And so I love the process. I love the interaction with the customer. But that's definitely one of the things that jumped out at us. And also, as you're implementing the new technology, the new way of doing business, a lot of the customers didn't really understand the technology until you're in the third or fourth sprint. And so we had to take a step back, right? Because now requirements are changing because they understand it a little bit better. So we had to take a step back and say, hey, maybe we should give them an overview of the capabilities of the technology. So I would say take that time up front, whether it's the kickoff meeting or another meeting, take that time up front to educate your customer base on the software or the new technology you're going to be using and the project management approach that you're going to be taking.
Anthony, when it comes to getting a successful project up off the ground and having the team be focused on the mission rather than the individual's, specific goals and what they're supposed to be doing, how do you get people into that mindset to lead as a team and stay mission focused?
Well, you have to find out what each individual values most while they're on that project. And from a federal standpoint, you can find yourself working with federal colleagues. You can find yourself working with vendors. You can find yourself working with employees who don't even want to be there. So you need to find out exactly, what actually is going to make them tick, what actually is going to resonate with them, and what actually irritates them, and try to minimize that. And frankly, sometimes if you're working with federal employees, you may have to have a conversation with their management. They may not be the right fit for the project. But be honest about that. Like the gentleman said earlier, you want to give the bad news early. It doesn't age like wine.
So Brian, when running a successful project, how important is it to get people talking to one another in different, departments, different, hierarchies within the government? How do you go about getting people to feel comfortable speaking to one another about, I might need this from you in order to do my job, so I'm going to need you to kind of pick it up over there and, make the flow of work a lot more feasible for everyone?
That's a wonderful question. And I think the answer is hard, especially doing it is difficult. Dusty brought up DevSecOps or DevOps. Not only does security become an opportunity to integrate, but so does accessibility. And so really getting everyone involved in software development, because software can be one of the core ways for an organization to show value to its users, to its public. So one of the questions I think many organizations will start wrestling with is, if you're not a part of this development team that's delivering software, what are you doing for me, right? Security or accessibility, right? So I think providing that space for folks to come together to integrate on that delivery pipeline and be a part of that. And what that requires is, I think, some psychological safety. That's critical. But also some professional respect back and forth, that the IT operation folks know their realm, the development folks, the security staff, and really allowing for some learning in that space as they start moving forward, and oftentimes figuring out how an industry best practice applies to them, and they start to improve their internal operations. I think everybody's talking about how government is learning. Dusty was talking about, he went over to the Air Force to learn and bring that back to the Marine Corps. Much of the federal government, definitely the state and local, is learning. And I think the psychological safety required for folks to try things, for small failures to lead to bigger successes in the future. I think all of that is really critical. And sharing those practices just as so anyway.
Yeah. So Mike, in your book, I'm wondering, what do you say about those small, fast wins? How important is that? Should you be encouraging, your team to do that? And at what point is, do you make that distinction between a failure, that is an unacceptable failure versus a failure that could potentially lead to learning and growth and more opportunity?
Well, I'm a big proponent of learning from your mistakes. Most people that have never made a mistake frighten me. Unfortunately, I usually ended up working for them. But organizations don't always reward the right people. But having said that, I think that it's really difficult to have short-term successes when you have managers that have an inordinate amount of meetings, and over proliferation of meetings is a huge problem that I found almost every project I've ever worked with or on or reviewed. And a lot of the reason for that, I think, is insecurity. People tend to schedule meetings when they're feeling doubt, when they're feeling insecure, when they're feeling like, oh, I don't know if my staff's really getting it done, or the only way I can really manage these people is every day make sure they're doing what I want them to do. And typically what that has, and it has the opposite effect. And so it's a little bit more of a soft part of technology, but it's interesting how these soft parts of technology quite often become the biggest risks on technology contracts. And then the other thing I would encourage is I love I think it was Anthony said wine, some things don't age like wine. Well, like wine, poor performers don't age well either. And managers quite often keep people around because they think they're being nice and they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But it doesn't do anybody on your contract a favor or your project to keep them beyond their ability to get the work done. It's going to hurt them, and it's hurting everyone else on your project. And that's another huge problem. You can go to almost any government project, and if it has more than 5 or 6 people, and say, give me a list of those people that really demotivate you because they're not getting the work done. They can't do their job. And there's almost always names that come up. And you wonder, why are these people still there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But the thing about the meetings too, though, I mean, it obviously is important to check in with your team, right? So this could go for any of the panelists. What would you say about is an appropriate number of meetings where you still feel connected to one another, especially in this virtual space, right? Because that could get lost real easily, but also not making it all about meetings so that people can't actually get their work done and be creative or think for themselves. Link, I'll turn that over to you first.
Sure. So it's a lot of it depends on the team and the team size. So I'm very much a factor of believe in the fact that we should have 0 meetings. We should have as much informal communication that is necessary, whether it's through Mattermost or Slack or a Zoom call directly between my teammates, be able to do it. And if it's something that needs to be solved and worked out, then let's just get on and work it out. I don't need the entire team to be there when we can do a lot of this asynchronously. And also I believe in allowing my team to treat them like adults. They know what they need to get done. And unless I have a reason that they're not getting it done or those type of things, then to allow them to decide the best way about doing that. But generally, I find in the federal government, the issue comes in the fact it's not the fact that the team needs meetings, it's because the stakeholders need information to go into a report that may or may not actually mean anything to anybody. So a lot of it goes in defining that what is success with your stakeholders. So it was brought up earlier, educating your stakeholder. It's not only on what the process is and what it is they're going to get, but what we need from them to actually be successful in that.
Does that resonate with any of the other panelists? All right, sounds like we're all aligned there. Let's go ahead and throw up our first poll question so that I don't forget to call on them. Let's see, first one, which of the following software development performance measurements is most important to your agency? Options include speed to mission, predictability, security, compliance, or other. So if you're at home and you want your CPE credits for being here, answer that. Let's talk about top challenges when it comes to project management. Dusty, you want to kick us off? What are some of the top challenges you see in your own organization?
Yeah, so I'll take a specific, acquisitions, DoD acquisitions approach to this and say, dealing with colors of money. is a big one for acquisitions. So we mainly work in O&M, procurement, and R&D funding, and especially when you're working in software, there isn't really, none of those really fit real well into a software development program. And working at Platform One and dealing with a lot of those things, you have a lot of your customers who are sending you money, they don't have all those different types of money because they're not acquisitions programs. So trying to figure out what the best source of money is, and maybe you need R&D, but all you have is O&M, and that's slowing down your process of delivering a capability to an end user.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Clarence, how about you? Is money a top challenge as well, or is there something else that you run into often?
I think money is always a top challenge for everybody, without a shadow of a doubt. I think for me, it's the customer really understanding, in HR modernization, the customer really has to understand their processes and that type of stuff, because we're coming in to change those things. And so it's been my experience, what most people will try to do is take an application that is supposed to improve their life and gain efficiencies and that type of stuff, and they'll configure it to the way that they're doing business today. And so that's been, so the biggest challenge that I've run up against is sitting in a meeting, and I try not to sit in many of them, but sitting in a meeting and they're developing and they're talking about, configuring the system and how they want it to work. And you need to have one or two people on your team or in that particular team that know enough about that business to challenge them. And a lot of times they don't like being challenged, but yeah, and there are customers, but they have to be challenged on not how they do business, but just their thought process about the way things are being done now and how it could be done, or maybe even should be done in the future. So that's a big challenge for us in federal HR. Big challenge.
Anthony, what about you? What are the top challenges, project management, that you experience? Muted.
I apologize, I was muted. For me, it's finding out who are the negative stakeholders and why, and especially if they're associated with the funding of the project, because they're always looking for a reason to stop it. So, my experience in the federal government has been a kind of a modified version of Game of Thrones. No one loses their head, but you lose your reputation or something else. So you actually want to find out, or not knowing what the unofficial org chart is in your organization. You have the org chart, but you need to find out what the unofficial org chart is and figuring out any project you're assigned, who are the major executives and what they want. Because sometimes you find out they really didn't care for the project. It was something they had to do to meet X need based off their career path or something they were directed to do. But I also, something was said that resonated with me is, a lot of times customers actually are afraid to re-examine their processes and business processes. And throwing technology at a horrible or not well thought out business process, it keeps a lot of contractors, employed, and it keeps a lot of weight on the government. But I do think you need to force the issue of getting to those folks who are doing the real work. Hey, how would you envision this? And once you have that clear conversation with those folks, not the C-level folks, but the folks who are actually doing the work, you're going to get some really good requirements. It's just that you have to find the one person or two people that are engaging.
Yeah. And for those at home who don't know, what is an org chart? Is that one of the tools for project management?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was shortening that. Organizational chart.
Oh, okay. Got it. Cool. Brian, top challenges. What do you see?
I'm going to pull on the threads that Anthony and Clarence were throwing out a bit there around the way I see it from 18F is a lot of our work and most technology work, I believe, in government breaks down to people, process, and technology. And we get called in to help because a government office or organization is unhappy with their tech stack. And one of the conversations I start with them is, well, your existing tech stack is a result of your internal processes, and those internal processes are associated with your people and culture. And I've gotten better about communicating that as early as possible, because I've seen with some partners that we start bringing up that holistic aspect, and they'll go, hey, wait, we were just wanting a better website or whatever. This tech stuff, why are you talking about how I talk to my people? You're getting way out of scope here. And it's like, no, all of this is interrelated. You're not very transparent as an organization. You know, you've got waterfall methods or your acquisition methods with vendors. Anyway, all of that is building your existing tech stack. So if you want it to be more modern, well, you got to improve all of this. And I think getting management and leadership to understand that sometimes it begins with them, this change, this transformation, or it involves them, and that not only is it your development team or those stakeholders who are going to start acting like engaged product owners, it's also, well, what about the folks in the C-suite or the middle management, them enabling folks more. The other gentleman was talking about all these meetings to make middle managers comfortable so that they can document things and all that work that isn't actually delivering software. Right. And I think management's starting to come around to that about what if we were to just release software faster, get more user feedback more rapidly, and just speed up those processes and get everyone more integrated, because that's what industry has done. So anyway, I think those are some of the big, not just challenges, but Kirsten, also the opportunities there.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, in your book, what do you mention as some of the top challenges?
Well, so a few. One is, I talked earlier in my presentation about requirements, being specific on requirements, but there's also such a thing as being too specific on your requirements. And I think that's really important. And a lot of the contract side in particular in government, industry for that matter too, really, they don't, agility is what their kid does when they do gymnastics. You know, it's not something they're that really familiar with. They see their task as being as specific as possible so that the vendors don't screw the government over. And so you've got this constant give and take and push and pull between the need for contracts that are well managed and the technical flexibility to be able to meet changing requirements. And so one of the things I would encourage in that is technical interchange meetings. I think too often we keep vendors at a distance so they don't overly influence the procurement, but at the same time, okay, we don't get the advantage of their input into what the contract's going to look like. And so that really has a huge effect on project success. If the project's spending, you know, half their time trying to meet every single requirement in the contract, and those requirements don't line up with what the technology is capable of doing, you've already got a big disconnect. And then the other thing I would, I think is a big challenge is project managers being able to admit that they don't have to be knowledgeable about every single vertical function in the organization. Not that many PMs, for instance, are financial experts, yet they're being held responsible for managing a financial baseline, both by their company and by the government. And this is the same with government project managers. Government project managers quite often aren't that familiar in detail with what the financial analysts in the government know. So I think it's really important to bring the HR and the finance and the recruiting and so on for project managements to have the courage and the confidence to not have to know it all and go ask questions. And that implies a culture that crosses the vertical stovepipes, which we see so often. And so it's amazing, isn't it, how much of a project's success is actually impacted by things out of their control, which is the culture of the organization.
Great, thank you. And then Link, from the industry perspective, what are some of the things that you see? What have you done to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I see, and it kind of ties everybody's, the panelists talking about their things together, is we often face this pressure of what I like to call speed to mission, right? Everybody wants things into the field faster, right? And I had a lieutenant colonel once tell me that, the need for, or the speed of safety is always slower than our adversary's speed to innovate. So we always have to try and figure out where's that perfect balance of the amount of risk that we're taking, the speed that we're doing it, and then how do we mitigate that risk to the most responsible way that we can. And for me, the way that we solve that, especially when we're looking at, systems that human lives are on the line, is truly bringing it back to something that Brian had said earlier, which is really celebrating a culture of failure. Every time I can get my team to discover failure as early and as often as possible, we save not only a ton of money for our projects, but we're actually saving lives when we do that. So putting that into the mind and bringing sure it's a stakeholder that we want to try all our high risk items from the very beginning at a very fast pace. And I want to give the developers the opportunity to try it, fail it, discover it, and fix it, right? And getting that not only to the point where the stakeholders accept that, but they actually celebrate that. It not only makes our projects more successful, it makes our teams more successful, which means I get to keep the strong people there. I get to build up that momentum. And a lot of us have seen, especially projects like Kobayashi Maru and several of those out there, early success builds upon success. And so for me, that key challenge is also where the key success comes into play.
Great. That's great. So let's talk about tools then. Tools to build up an organization, whether it's the technology or methodologies. Dusty, what are some of the things that you use within your own agency?
Yeah, thank you. So regarding the tools, so your collaboration tools on the technology side are really key to effective communication and as well as project management, right? So I think most project managers are probably familiar with your typical Microsoft project and trying to manage an IMS or something like that. But what I've found, and I think a lot of other folks have probably found, is using something more modern like Jira and Confluence for managing a Kanban board and just your agile workflows. Shares information throughout your team far better than an integrated master schedule, and trying to manage a project that way. And then like Link mentioned before, your chat applications, whether it's Slack or Mattermost or something along those lines, that allows inter-team communication without having to jump in a meeting room every time you need to communicate with somebody or use any other form of communication. It definitely seems to be best practices that I've seen so far.
Yeah, Clarence, what about you? What are some of the things that you're implementing? You did.
He just mentioned, the definitely the collaboration tools, because I'm definitely a big proponent of the lesser meetings, the better. And one of the methodologies I use, I don't have hour-long meetings anymore. I limit my meetings to 30 to 45 minutes. And we should be able to get everything we need to get done. But so we use most, Zoom, for collaboration. We use WebEx. We use, what's the other one? Teams. We almost use all of them. But the biggest thing that we use is, like I told you before, we're on the ServiceNow platform. And so we use its project, program manager, portfolio with financials. And that's been a big help for us because we can see things. Okay, and everybody can see it. I think one of the challenges is the PM of the project team, the budget people not having insight, the acquisition people who deal with the contracts, or the program manager who deals with the contracts, not having insight, and so everybody sees everything, and therefore you can run reports, etc. I am allergic I am absolutely allergic to Excel spreadsheets. I am allergic to. So those are
I
ones.
don't think you're alone in that.
Yeah.
Anthony, do you feel like the tools that are needed depend upon the organization and what it is that they're trying to achieve? Or do you feel like there's a standard set of tools that could be used no matter what, they're always going to work? What are your thoughts around that?
Well, pre-COVID, I was a big fan of just information radiators that you place around the office. Some agencies won't allow to use wall space, but you can use a monitor, hook that up to your network. And if you're using any of the tools that, the previous guest mentioned, you can actually put those information radiators throughout your whole building. I think the more that you actually share information with stakeholders, the better. I've worked on Scrum projects when basically everything's in one cubicle with sticky pads, and it worked. I once done a work breakdown structure for a month period, sequestered a team in the room, and everything's on the wall. So everyone understands the accountability before you dump everything in the project. So I believe it's about the investment the agency has in the tool and what tool resonates with certain individuals. I'm not sure if I answered the question though.
No, I mean, I think you did. And Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you next. Do you agree with that statement, or what is your view when it comes to the tools?
Yeah, I think any method, any vehicle to facilitate transparency helps. There's been, I always go back to Clay Shirky's thoughts on it, his wonderful book, Here Comes Everybody, where he's talking about blogs and wikis, and this is like 15, 20 years ago. And I think anytime you can eliminate channelized communication and go towards platform communication, so if that's literally on a table or up on a and-on board, up on the wall, whether it's digital or stickies, if everyone's in the office, or Trello boards or Jira, whatever the tool. Slack is great. So if you can get rid of the phone calls and emails and get it into platforms like wikis, that's any of those tools and the culture around it to get folks openly sharing on what things are doing. And a number of other folks said, getting the stakeholders involved, because a lot of those tools will record the interaction. So if someone asks a year and a half later, well, hey, Anthony, why'd you put that feature in? You can go, you can dig back into that particular card and see all the interaction between who was the product owner at the time and why those decisions were made. All that is really powerful and helps, I think, people feel safer, and for the overall development efforts to just drive in a better direction.
Mm-hmm. Great. Link, can you share some of the tools to build an organization? And can you also explain to us what Swivel?
Sure. So before I came to GitLab, I was actually a GitLab customer, and I was trying to solve what I call swivel chair management. And so if you can imagine, we were running a large program, over 40 projects going on. We had Jira, we had Confluence, we had a whole bunch of different development tools. And what I found out my team was doing was they were literally logging out of one system, going to see what it is they were to do, then logging into another system, trying to figure out what to do the work, and then logging back out of that system, going into the first one and writing into it. At one point, we were working across multiple classified networks. So they were literally swiveling their chairs to log on to different machines to do updates within it. So the swivel chair syndrome is, to me, was the more my team has to switch context, the worse we're off we are as a team. So I went out in search of a product that allowed me to bring things together and make it so that we live. Now, either that was through having built-in capability to manage the issue boards and the Scrum and Kanbans and those type of things, or to integrate with our existing systems so that they didn't have to jump from system to system. So I became a fan of GitLab, so much so that I relentlessly pursued them to be able to come work for them with that. But what I found is that every context switch that I could save my team actually increased our we'll call it my happiness quotient within the team. The easier it is for your team to accomplish the actual work, the more job satisfaction they actually get from it. And we can eliminate that style of paperwork. So I'm a big fan of, if you have systems that work, great. But one of your focuses should always be, how do I eliminate that context switching for my team?
Awesome, thank you. Let's throw up the next poll question real quick, and then let's just throw up the third and final one as well before we run out of time. Number one, how long does it take to do rapid deployments within your agency? And go ahead and answer that. Mel, once that's ready, go ahead and throw up the last one. And the last 4 minutes of this panel discussion, let's leave the audience with gaining excitement from your team. So rapid fire round, what is your advice for gaining excitement from your team and getting them on board with what it is that you need to accomplish? Let's start with Mike, please.
Don't overburden them with feeding the reporting beast.
All right, thank you. And Dusty.
I would say paint a picture of what your end state wants to look like, so that they have a kind of a vision of where their specific role on the project is going to go, so they have something to shoot for.
Awesome. Clarence.
Find out what your project and development team pain points are when it comes to developing a project, and incorporate that in your kickoff meeting. I look at kickoff meetings a little bit different. I know it's kicking off the project, but one of the things that have worked for me in the past is, of course, in the kickoff meeting, you come up with an agenda, and there is time frames for each agenda item, and people will come and go depending on what subject matter is important to them. So a kickoff meeting may last more than an hour, it may last 2 hours, but everything is up front. All the stakeholders are there. Everybody has gotten the information and asked all the questions. And so the project management team and the development team love it.
Thank you, Clarence. Over to you, Anthony.
If you can find a way to link that project to maybe legislation or the current administration's goals, that's a win, because I find that people actually like to brag about that.
That's good. And Brian, what are your thoughts?
Making sure you have your users identified, and that their requirements are well understood and prioritized, so you can rapidly deliver a minimum viable product to start getting user feedback as quickly as possible, because delivery is the strategy. Planning to perfection never works. And, we've had some DoD talk here today. I love Eisenhower's quote, General and President Eisenhower's quote of, the planning process is indispensable, but plans are worthless, right? It's this Taoistic dichotomy that feedback and observed outcomes should be driving everything. So I think really having a tightly defined list of requirements that you can deliver on rapidly to create an MVP is critical, and knowing who those users are.
Awesome, thank you. And Link, we'll end this panel discussion with your answer.
Excellent. So I'm going to say that it's be the change that you want everybody else to be. So for me, that's very publicly thanking my team for finding failure early. It's ending meetings early. It's thanking people for calling me and saying, you know what, we don't need to do this, so let's not do it. And so very much trying to be the change that I want to see everybody else to do, because you find it's infectious for your team to do it. And if you can get your stakeholders to do it too, that's even better.
Excellent, so good. Thank you guys for those insights. And then Mel, I don't know, did we pop up the last poll question already? If not, please go ahead and do that. And for those of you at home, unfortunately, that is all the time we have. Thank you again to our partners at GitLab and our awesome panelists. We hope to see you again on July 10th from 10 a.m. to 12:15 p.m. Eastern Time for ATARC's Federal Cloud Migration Virtual Summit. During this discussion, topic experts will cover ways to migrate to the cloud and look at common migration experiences, benefits of cloud migration, and strategies for dealing with disaster recovery. So we hope to see you there, and everyone have a great rest of their afternoon. Bye.